Uche and Joku, sneaker principal. And this morning I'm in Hudson Park, and beautiful, beautiful morning. The sun is beaming down, a nice golden hue. And it's going to be another warm day, but right now it, the balance of things is working. So the past two videos I've been talking about generational trauma. We trying to understand why we do what we do, and also make that connection to our classrooms, to our families, to children. Um, and as I was reflecting on the past two videos, I thought about my middle school years. I came to America in 1988, November, and I was registered at La Tijera Middle School in Inglewood, California, and that was sixth grade. And due to my pretty decent math skills and science skills, and my comprehension skills were pretty good. I had a really strong foundational educational in Nigeria, and foundational education in Nigeria, and as a result, thankfully, Miss Washington, who was my science teacher, and Miss White, who was my math teacher, spoke to Miss Washington, who was another Miss Washington, who was my principal, and they brought my parents in and said, "Listen, your son does not belong in the sixth grade based on his abilities. Let's put him in the eighth grade. That's where we've discovered his abilities would best fit." And I'm very thankful for that. This is on a side note. American educational system forces us to put kids in categories, and no matter how strong a kid is at the abilities, if you're 12, you're in this grade. If you're 10, you're in this grade. But I had those teachers who were forward thinking and said, "Listen, let's put him where he belongs so he can develop properly." So that meant that I went from, in November, it might have been early December, I went from sixth to eighth grade. So I'm sitting in the classroom, I think it was 11 or 12, sitting in the eighth grade classroom. I was small. Like right now, on a good day, I'm 5'9". Back then, on a good day, I was 5'3", maybe 5'2", you know. And so I walked into a classroom now where I was the smallest kid, I was the youngest kid, and all the kids were like, "Wait a minute, first of all, he's the new kid. He has this weird accent, I just got from Nigeria. And wait a minute, was he in the sixth grade? What was he doing in our classroom?" So what did that do? It made me a target. So of course, as middle schoolers, as the middle school experience, I'm pretty sure it's pretty much not that different in most places. You're gonna have those kids who are trying to exercise their authority and their status by bullying easy targets. And I was a easy target. So I got all the jokes, African booty scratcher, you know, um, you stink, we saw your family on TV, we are the world, how come y'all don't got no food? Like, I mean, these are all the things, but then it went from that to deeper and deeper jokes to bullying, straight abuse. So kids would say stuff and push my buttons, and I was attacked a couple of times. By the end of my time at La Tijera, which was literally one semester, if you think about it, I'd been in the principal's office about five times, and I was suspended about five times. And it was always like 1 day, 2 days a week. But it was funny because for the new kid, I was suspended a lot. and and you would think, why are they suspending you? You're the one being bullied. Well, the thing is that I was throwing hands. Like for me, it was like no question. I was fighting. And and a lot of times their words would lead me to attack. I can only think about one time where I was attacked, but I was doing the attacking. So my thing was, I didn't care how big you were. I once had a fight with these two kids. I will hold back their names. I will never forget their names. One was probably easily about 6'3". The other one was about maybe 6 feet, maybe 5'11". And the one who was 5'11" was big. He was probably a good 230, 240. He was a big boy. and I did not care. I jumped on him, um, and and again, some of you might be like, "Well, that's really weak. That you words no." Um, you have to understand, and anyone who's ever been bullied, those words are devastating, especially when it's coupled with other kids laughing and pointing. That fight that I had with these two big kids, and there was two of them at the same time. It was I remember anyone who's watching this who went to school with me, you probably remember this. PE, I think it was the last period of the day, and we were walking the track, and all of a sudden, I get hit in the back of the head with an apple. But I had seen this apple just minutes earlier because those two boys had an apple in their hand from lunch, and they were squeezing it, and they were like hitting it on the ground to make it soft. And at least that's what now I know that's what they were doing. Then I just didn't know what they were doing with this apple. They had pretty much turned it into an apple sauce bomb. Basically, they had taken that apple and softened it, and so much that at one point they just beamed it back in my head. It exploded, apple mush everywhere, and listen, I was like Waterboy. I was like Bobby Boucher in Waterboy, and I was like, ah. But the thing was, all comedy aside, I had hands. So I was throwing punches, I was punched back, I had no fear. And it was funny because you would think, okay, now you're being bullied, but you're also attacking your bullies, and you're not scared of them. I wasn't scared of them. But what's interesting about this is why was I behaving the way? Why was I reacting the way I was reacting? And you might be asking yourself, what do you mean by the way you're reacting? Being bullied. Secret. I was actually anticipating the fights. I was actually welcoming the fights. And I'll tell you why. At home, I was going through a lot. I was getting my butt kicked. I was getting whooped. I was getting flogged. I was slapped, punched, kicked. All these things were happening. My father, as I spoke about earlier in an earlier video, was doing what he knew because it was what was done to him. So it was what was done to him as he was being raised. It was also what was done to him 10x when he was in the military. Mind you, my father was drafted into a civil war. I think he was like 14, 15. So he went through all this for a number of years. The span of one of the most horrific civil wars in Africa. He survived. He was shot at, he was actually shot, he was actually hit and wounded in battle, and all as a teenager. And all these things that were never dealt with. Because mind you, we're talking about the 60s, people talk about Vietnam. There was other things happening around the world as well that were independent of what was going on with American wars and the European wars and Asian wars. There was no PTSD. There was no counseling, especially for a kid that he was. So he becomes a man and thinks the way that you raise and you control children is through this physical violence. Maybe it wasn't considered physical violence, but that firm hand, but that firm iron fist was what he understood. So as a kid, and my father, in my eyes, being a giant, I can't do anything about it. I couldn't fight back. I couldn't, resist like most children. But what would happen is at school, guess what happened now? I was like, okay, I have all this pent up inside of me. Say something to me, say the right thing to me, give me a reason. And that was the kid I was. The generation trauma poured into me, and I went to school and I did my work. I was a good student. I mean, in that one semester, I graduated probably top 5 in the class. Just at least for that semester, my grades were on point. I won a couple of awards for poetry and all. Like I was a good student, but however, I, looking back now, was being bullied, but I welcomed it because it was the only space that I had to release. I wasn't getting any counseling. No one was talking to me. Nobody knew what was going on at home. The closest thing that I was getting to counseling was my mother, holding me in tears, saying it's going to be okay. One day you won't have to go through this anymore, because even she was going through it. She was being brutalized as well. So these spaces, you know, were spaces that were never addressed. And as an adult, I know that I have that in me, and this is something we don't want to talk about, but a lot of children grow up and they still have that in them. If especially if it's not addressed, it's not worked through, and and it's something we have to recognize. Some of us are lucky enough to be able to manage it well enough, but think about our kids in our classrooms, those who come to school and you're like, man, the behavior, the fighting, all these craziness happening, and you're putting on the child, and you're thinking this child needs to learn how to better X, Y, Z. But the question is, have anyone really assessed or dug deeper to the why of what the child is doing? Because I really believe once we dig deeper, we find those spaces, you find those things, they can get that child help. You can get that family help. But we don't do that. We blame the victim for their actions and their behavior, and we demonize them and we brutalize them, through the system. Now, how many men are locked up in prison because of simply that, what they went through as children? How many women are locked up in prison? How many people, human beings, are just going through cycles of just violence and pain because of what they went through as children? And I'm telling you this right now, and it's hard for me to say this. I am not perfect. There are many times I have to catch myself. There are many times as an adult I've had to be like, damn, that went too far, because again, that space as children, were never dealt with. I will never forget being told by someone, you got to learn how to parent yourself. I was like, that's crazy, because the parenting of me should have happened when I was a kid, right? And now here I am as a middle-aged man. What do you mean parent myself? But it's the truth. You got to find ways, especially I'm talking to the adults right now. If any of this, what I'm saying, is resonating with you, you got to find ways to parent yourself, whether it's talking about it, whether it's, getting professional help and counseling, whatever the case may be. Is very important, especially if you have children of your own, because you don't want that thing that formed you into who you are today, you know, that you think you have under control, to creep back out and now infect your children. And yes, it is an infection. You know, there have been many times that I keep telling myself I would never beat my children. But the times I've said things and I've done things, like, out of anger, I'm thinking like, well, it's better than putting my hands on them. But they're just as negative and just as, you know, impactful in a negative manner to their development. Then I've got, oh snap, I shouldn't have done that. And it's funny because I speak to more and more parents who've said to me, bro, listen, I've done that too. And I had to apologize and go for ice cream and whatever, and check myself. And I'm like, it's funny because part of those conversations, we're never talking about what we went through as children. No, we're never talking about generational trauma. Um, so yeah, like I want you, if you're watching this as an adult, to reconsider these things. If you're an educator in your classrooms, you know, or you're a school leader, get your guidance counselors really thinking about this. Bring some help into your school and really see a lot of our kids who are, and you know who they are, who you just like, oh, when you show up to school, you're like, I hope today nothing happens. Those are the kids we got to pour into and find out what's going on, find out what the triggers are, so that we can help them. But it's not just about keeping the school calm and quiet so kids can learn. It's also saving them from themselves so they don't go into adulthood and, living this life of sometimes internal quiet chaos that erupts into things that could get them locked up, get them killed, get them in all kinds of hurt. All right, y'all, this is Uche and Joku. I hope this is helpful to someone out there. This is hard for me, because I'm tapping into spaces where I keep in my head and don't verbalize, but I know how important this is. As a parent, as an educator, as someone who's committed his life towards working with young people and working with children. Um, with that being said, have an amazing day, and I'll talk to you all soon, all right? Be well.